The message that almost destroyed Adaeze Okafor's peace arrived in the most ordinary moment of her life. It wasn't a long message. If you're new to this channel, just subscribe now and say it in the comment section. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't even mention a name. But those four simple words had the power to shake a marriage that had stood strong for 7 years. I miss you already. Adaeze didn't open the message. She didn't need to. The glowing notification on the screen was enough to make her heart beat faster than it had in years. And in that moment, a dangerous question entered her mind. Who exactly was missing her husband? But this story didn't begin with that message. It began with a marriage that everyone believed was perfect. 7 years earlier, Adaeze had married Chinedu Okafor in a colourful wedding in Lagos that people still talked about long after the music stopped playing. Friends had admired how Chinedu looked at her during the ceremony, like she was the only woman in the world. Even the pastor had joked during the service. If every man loved his wife the way Chinedu looks at Adaeze, marriage counselling would go out of business. Everyone laughed. And Adaeze believed it. In those early years, their home was filled with warmth. Chinedu was hardworking, thoughtful, and surprisingly romantic for a man who spent most of his days running his electronics business on Lagos Island. He brought home small surprises. Sometimes flowers. Sometimes her favorite snacks. Sometimes nothing more than a warm hug and the words, "My queen, how was your day?" Those little moments made Adaeze feel lucky. Her friends often complained about their husbands' late nights, careless words, forgotten anniversaries. But whenever they gathered for dinner or birthdays, someone would always say the same thing. "Adaeze, you're lucky, oh. Your husband is different." And for years, Adaeze believed it without question. But sometimes, doubt doesn't arrive like a storm. Sometimes it creeps in quietly. The first change was so small that Adaeze almost ignored it. Chinedu started coming home a little later than usual. Not extremely late. Just later. Instead of arriving around 6:30 p.m., he would appear around 8. When Adaeze asked about it, he smiled and loosened his tie. "Business is expanding. More customers now. You should be happy for me." She smiled back. "I am happy." And she meant it. But then came the phone. Chinedu had never been secretive with his phone before. It used to lie casually on the table, the couch, or the kitchen counter. But recently, he carried it everywhere. To the bathroom. To the balcony. Even to the kitchen when he went to grab water. Adaeze noticed something else too. Whenever she walked into the room unexpectedly, Chinedu's fingers moved quickly across the screen before the phone locked. At first, Adaeze tried to laugh it off. Maybe he was planning a surprise. Maybe it was business conversations. Maybe she was imagining things. But the human mind is strange. Once doubt enters, it begins collecting evidence. One night, while they watched television together, Chinedu's phone vibrated beside him. He glanced at the screen. Then quickly flipped the phone over. Adaeze pretended not to notice. But her stomach tightened. Later that night, as they prepared for bed, she casually asked, "Business keeping you very busy these days?" Chinedu stretched his arms and nodded. "You have no idea. Customers everywhere. It's good though." "I'm glad," Adaeze replied. He kissed her forehead before turning off the light. But Adaeze stared into the darkness long after he fell asleep. Something didn't feel right. Days passed. Then weeks. The strange behavior continued. More late nights. More secretive texting. More quick glances at his phone. Adaeze hated how her mind kept wandering to dark places. She had always trusted Chinedu. He had never given her a reason not to. But trust becomes fragile when silence replaces reassurance. One afternoon, Adaeze visited her friend Ifunanya. They sat together in her living room, sipping chilled zobo while the ceiling fan spun lazily above them. Ifunanya noticed the distant look in Adeze's eyes. "You're quiet today. What's going on?" Adaeze hesitated. "Nothing." Ifunanya laughed softly. "I've known you for 15 years. When you say nothing, it means something." Adaeze sighed. "It's probably just my imagination." "About Chinedu?" Adaeze looked up, surprised. "How did you know?" "If a married woman looks worried like this, it's usually about her husband." Adaeze stirred her drink slowly. "He's been different lately." "Different how?" "He comes home late. Always on his phone. And he hides the screen when I walk in." Ifunanya raised an eyebrow. "That's not a good sign." Adaeze quickly shook her head. No. Chinedu isn't like that." Ifunanya leaned back. "Most women say that right before they find out something they didn't expect." Adaeze forced a small laugh. "You're watching too many drama movies." "Maybe. But my advice? Pay attention." The words lingered in Adeze's mind long after she left her friend's house. Pay attention. That evening, Chinedu came home around 8:15 p.m. He looked tired but cheerful. "My queen," he called from the doorway. Adaeze walked into the living room. "You're late again." Traffic was terrible. She nodded quietly. They ate dinner together, talking about normal things, the rising cost of food, a neighbor's noisy generator, and a new customer at Chinedu's shop. For a moment, everything felt normal again. Maybe she had been overthinking. Maybe Ifunanya had planted unnecessary suspicion in her mind. After dinner, Chinedu went to take a shower. Adaeze began clearing the plates when she heard a soft buzz from the dining table. She glanced over. Chinedu's phone was lying there. The screen lit up. Adaeze froze. Her first instinct was to ignore it. But something inside her pulled her closer. She didn't pick up the phone. She didn't touch it. She simply looked at the glowing notification. And that was when she saw it. "I miss you already." Adaeze felt the air leave her lungs. Her mind began racing. Who sent that? Why would someone say that to a married man? The bathroom shower continued running. Adaeze stood there, staring at the phone like it had just revealed a secret she wasn't ready to face. Her thoughts became louder. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was a wrong number. Maybe it was business. But deep down, another voice whispered something she didn't want to hear. What if it wasn't a mistake? Adaeze quickly stepped away from the table just as the bathroom door opened. Chinedu walked out, drying his hair with a towel. "You haven't gone to bed yet?" he asked. "I was just finishing the dishes," she replied calmly. He picked up his phone. For a brief second, Adaeze watched his eyes scan the screen. Then he locked it. "Long day," he said. Adaeze forced a smile. "Yes, long day." They went to bed shortly after. Chinedu fell asleep quickly. But Adaeze lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Her mind replayed those 4 words again and again. "I miss you already." Sleep refused to come. By morning, her thoughts had become something else entirely. A plan. A risky one. And although she didn't realize it yet, that decision would test not only her husband's loyalty, but also the strength of the trust she believed their marriage was built on. The idea sounded foolish the first time it entered Adeze's mind. By morning, however, it didn't feel foolish anymore. It felt necessary. Adaeze sat at the edge of the bed, staring at the sunlight creeping through the curtains. Chinedu had already left for work after their usual quick breakfast. He had kissed her cheek, grabbed his keys, and said his normal cheerful goodbye. Nothing about his behavior suggested guilt. Nothing about him looked like a man hiding something. Yet the memory of the message still burned in Adaeze's mind. "I miss you already." She had replayed the moment countless times during the night. The way the screen lit up. The exact wording of the message. The calm expression on Chinedu's face when he picked up the phone. If the message meant something serious, he had hidden it well. But Adaeze could not ignore the feeling growing in her chest. She needed to know the truth. Not guesses. Not assumptions. The truth. She picked up her own phone and stared at it for several seconds. Her thumb hovered over the screen as her heart beat faster. "Maybe I'm overthinking," she whispered to herself. But the thought didn't calm her. Instead, another idea began forming. What if she could find out the truth without confronting him? What if she could test him without him ever knowing? Adaeze sat up straighter. The plan appeared simple in her mind, though her stomach twisted as she considered it. She would message him. Not as his wife. As someone else. If Chinedu ignored the message or shut down the conversation immediately, she would know her worries were nothing but fear. But if he responded differently? Adaeze pushed the thought away before it could finish forming. Her fingers moved slowly as she opened a new SIM card package she had bought weeks earlier for an unrelated reason. She inserted it into an old phone she kept in a drawer. Her hands trembled slightly. "This is crazy," she muttered. But she continued anyway. A few minutes later, the phone powered on with its new number. Adaeze opened the messaging app and typed Chinedu's number carefully. Her heart was pounding now. This was the moment. Once she sent the message, there would be no turning back. She began typing. "Hello? I know this might sound strange, but I've noticed you around before. You seem like an interesting man." She read the message twice. Then 3 times. Her chest tightened. Part of her desperately hoped he would ignore it. Or block the number immediately. That would end the madness. That would prove her husband was exactly who she believed he was. But the other part of her needed to know. Adaeze closed her eyes briefly. Then she pressed send. The message left her phone. For several seconds, she simply stared at the screen. Nothing happened. Then she placed the phone on the table and stood up quickly, pacing around the living room. "What am I doing?" she whispered. She imagined Chinedu seeing the message at his shop. Would he laugh and ignore it? Would he delete it? Would he tell her about it later? Adaeze stopped pacing and looked at the phone again. Still nothing. Her breathing began to slow. Maybe he was busy. Maybe he hadn't seen it. Or maybe... The phone buzzed suddenly. Adaeze jumped. Her heart slammed against her ribs as she grabbed the phone and looked at the screen. A reply. From Chinedu. Her stomach dropped. She hesitated before opening the message. Then she tapped the screen. "Do I know you?" Adaeze sat down slowly. He had replied. He hadn't ignored it. He hadn't blocked the number. He had responded. Her thoughts raced. Maybe he was just confused. Maybe he wanted to know who was texting him. That didn't mean anything yet. Adaeze tried to steady her breathing as she typed her next message. "Not exactly. But I've seen you a few times around Victoria Island. I didn't know if it was strange to say hello." She stared at the words. Then she pressed send. Seconds later, she felt a wave of nervous energy. This felt wrong. She was lying to her own husband. But at the same time, she reminded herself why she started. Truth. That was all she wanted. A few minutes passed before the phone buzzed again. "You might have mistaken me for someone else," Chinedu replied. "I run a shop there, so maybe that's where you saw me." Adaeze blinked. His response sounded normal. Polite. Careful. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. Maybe this would end quickly. She typed again. Maybe. I just thought you looked like someone interesting to talk to. This time the reply took longer. Adaeze found herself staring at the typing indicator when it appeared. 3 small dots. They vanished. Then appeared again. Then disappeared. Finally the message arrived. Well, I don't usually chat with strangers like this. Adaeze exhaled slowly. That sounded like the Chinedu she knew. Responsible. Careful. But then another message followed. But since you've already said hello, it would be rude not to respond. Adaeze's fingers tightened around the phone. The conversation was continuing. She leaned back in the chair, unsure whether she felt relief or anxiety. For the next few minutes, the conversation remained simple. Light. Safe. She introduced herself as Amora. He told her briefly about his business. Adaeze paid attention to every word he typed, studying the tone carefully. Chinedu remained polite. Friendly. But not overly interested. At least not yet. Still, Adaeze couldn't ignore the strange feeling building in her chest. She was learning things about her husband through a lie. Later that evening, when Chinedu returned home, he looked exactly as he always did. Relaxed. Smiling. He greeted her warmly. My queen, I'm starving. Adaeze forced a natural smile. Dinner is almost ready. As they ate together, Adaeze studied him quietly. Was he thinking about the messages? Was he aware of the conversation they had earlier? There was no sign. He spoke about work, about a customer who had argued over prices, about traffic on 3rd Mainland Bridge. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. Yet Adaeze felt like she was sitting across from someone she was secretly spying on. After dinner, Chinedu sat on the couch checking his phone briefly before putting it down. Adaeze watched the screen light up. Was it the fake number again? Was he replying? But he locked the phone and leaned back comfortably. Today was exhausting, he said. Adaeze nodded. I can imagine. Later that night, after Chinedu fell asleep, Adaeze quietly picked up the second phone again. Her heart pounded as she opened the conversation. There were no new messages. She stared at the chat history. Part of her felt relieved. Another part felt disappointed. Then suddenly the phone buzzed again. A new message appeared. From Chinedu. Are you still awake? Adaeze sat upright immediately. Her pulse quickened. Why would he message again this late? Her mind raced with possibilities. Was he curious? Bored? Interested? Adaeze stared at the message for nearly a full minute before responding. Yes, she typed. A few seconds later, his reply arrived. Just checking. You seemed like an interesting person earlier. Adaeze's chest tightened. The test she had started that morning was no longer a simple experiment. The conversation had begun growing into something more. And as she stared at the glowing screen in the dark bedroom, Adaeze realized something unsettling. She had opened a door that might reveal truths she wasn't ready to face. But now that the conversation had started, she couldn't stop. By the 3rd day, the fake conversation had begun to feel dangerously real. Adaeze woke up that morning with the second phone already in her hand. She had barely slept the night before, her mind constantly drifting back to the messages she and Chinedu had exchanged late into the night. He had been polite. Friendly. But something about the conversation unsettled her. Not because he had crossed any clear line, but because he hadn't ended it either. Adaeze sat quietly on the edge of the bed as early morning light filled the room. Chinedu was still asleep beside her, breathing steadily, completely unaware that his wife had been the woman texting him just hours earlier. She studied his face. He looked peaceful. Innocent. The same man she had loved for years. "Why am I doing this?" she whispered softly. Part of her wanted to stop. Delete the number. Pretend none of it had happened. But another part of her refused. She needed certainty. She needed proof. That morning, Chinedu left for work as usual. He kissed her cheek before leaving, grabbing his briefcase and calling over his shoulder, "Don't forget we're visiting my mother this weekend." "I won't forget," Adaeze replied. The door closed. Silence filled the house. Within minutes, Adaeze picked up the second phone again. There was already a message waiting. "Good morning, Amora." Her stomach tightened. He had texted first. She stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "Good morning. Hope you slept well." The typing bubble appeared almost instantly. "Not bad. Busy day ahead though. What about you?" Adaeze leaned back on the couch as they continued the conversation. She kept her responses careful, measured, never revealing too much. Yet she also made sure the conversation stayed alive. She asked about his business. He asked about her work. She told him she was a freelance interior designer who moved around Lagos often for projects. The lie flowed easier than she expected. But every message carried an uncomfortable weight. She was talking to her own husband as if she were someone else. Around midday, the conversation slowed as Chinedu focused on work. Adaeze placed the phone on the table, trying to distract herself with house chores. But her mind kept wandering back to the messages. So far, he hadn't flirted. He hadn't suggested meeting. He hadn't crossed any obvious boundaries. Still, he continued replying. And that alone made Adaeze uneasy. By evening, the conversation resumed again. Chinedu messaged first. "Long day." Adaeze smiled slightly. "Tell me about it," she replied. "Business warala," he wrote. "Customers arguing over prices like I'm selling gold." Adaeze almost laughed. That sounded exactly like something Chinedu would say. For a moment, the strangeness of the situation overwhelmed her. She was having a normal conversation with her husband while pretending to be someone else. Later that evening, Chinedu returned home. Adaeze tried her best to behave normally. They ate dinner together, discussing ordinary things again. But this time, Adaeze noticed something new. Occasionally, Chinedu would glance at his phone with a thoughtful expression before putting it down again. Was he thinking about Amora? The thought sent a strange chill through her. That night, after they both went to bed, Adaeze waited until Chinedu's breathing became deep and steady. Then she quietly picked up the second phone again. She stared at the conversation. Her heart beat faster as a new idea formed in her mind. If she truly wanted to test his loyalty, she would have to push further. So far, the conversation had remained friendly. Safe. But the real test hadn't happened yet. Adaeze's fingers hovered above the screen. Her mind warned her to stop. But her curiosity was stronger. She typed a new message. "You seem like a good man." She hesitated before finishing the sentence. "But I feel like you might be hiding something." Her heart pounded as she stared at the screen. Then she pressed send. The message delivered immediately. Adaeze held her breath. Seconds passed. No response. Her stomach tightened. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe he was ignoring it. Then suddenly the typing bubble appeared. 3 small dots blinking on the screen. Adaeze sat up straighter. The dots disappeared. Then reappeared. Then vanished again. It felt like an eternity. Finally, the message arrived. "What do you mean by that?" Adaeze swallowed. She quickly typed her next line. "I just have a feeling. Are you married?" The moment she sent it, her pulse quickened. This was the question. The real test. She stared at the phone so intensely that her eyes began to ache. Seconds passed. Then minutes. No reply. Adaeze's mind began racing. Was he thinking of a lie? Was he deciding how to respond? Or was he simply ignoring the question? Beside her, Chinedu shifted slightly in his sleep. Adaeze glanced at him. He looked completely relaxed. Completely unaware. Her phone screen remained silent. 5 minutes passed. Then 7. Adaeze's anxiety grew heavier with every passing second. She imagined different possibilities. Maybe he would lie and say he was single. Maybe he would avoid the question entirely. Maybe he would flirt. Each possibility twisted her stomach further. Then suddenly, the phone buzzed. A new message. Adaeze felt her heart slam against her chest as she opened it. Yes. Just one word. Yes. Adaeze blinked. He hadn't hesitated to admit it. But before she could process it fully, another message appeared. Yes. I'm married. Adaeze's breathing slowed slightly. But the typing bubble appeared again. Another message followed. And my wife means everything to me. Adaeze froze. She stared at the screen, barely believing what she was reading. Another message arrived. So if this conversation is going somewhere inappropriate, I should stop it now. Adaeze's chest tightened. The words felt sincere. Direct. Unmistakable. He continued. I respect my marriage too much to cross that line. Adaeze lowered the phone slowly. Her eyes burned with unexpected tears. For days, she had doubted him. Watched him. Tested him. Yet in a single moment, he had answered the question she feared most. He hadn't flirted. He hadn't lied. He had chosen his marriage. Adaeze sat quietly in the dark bedroom. Beside her, Chinedu slept peacefully, unaware of the invisible test he had just passed. A strange mix of emotions filled her chest. Relief. Gratitude. And guilt. Because the man lying beside her had remained loyal. But she had secretly doubted him. And now she carried a truth that only she knew. Her husband had proven his loyalty. But he had no idea he had even been tested. Adaeze didn't sleep for the rest of the night. She lay on her side of the bed, staring into the darkness while Chinedu slept peacefully beside her. Every few minutes she would glance at him, as if seeing him differently now. His breathing was calm and steady. Nothing about him suggested that, just minutes earlier, he had made a decision that restored the very trust she had been quietly tearing apart. Her phone still rested in her hand. The message glowed on the screen. And my wife means everything to me. Adaeze felt a heavy knot form in her chest. For days she had allowed suspicion to grow inside her. She had watched him carefully, studied his habits, analyzed his words. And in the end, he had remained exactly who he had always been. Loyal. Respectful. Faithful. The guilt hit her harder than she expected. I shouldn't have done this, she whispered softly. She opened the chat again and typed a reply as Amora. That's rare these days. Your wife must be lucky. She stared at the message for a second before sending it. A few moments later, Chinedu replied. No. I'm the lucky one. Adaeze's throat tightened. Another message followed. Marriage isn't perfect. But when you find someone who truly stands beside you, you protect that. Adaeze slowly placed the phone down. Tears filled her eyes. The man she had been secretly testing was the same man who had stood beside her through every stage of their lives together. She remembered their first apartment in Suryalia, a small place with peeling paint and a noisy generator next door. They had barely owned any furniture then, but Chinedu had always made her laugh. Back then they promised each other something simple. No matter what happens, we always talk to each other. But somewhere along the way, Adaeze had broken that promise. Instead of talking, she had tested. Instead of trusting, she had doubted. Morning arrived slowly. When the alarm rang, Chinedu stretched and sat up. "Morning, my queen," he said with a sleepy smile. Adaeze forced a small smile back. "Morning." He walked to the bathroom while she remained sitting on the bed, watching him. She wanted to tell him everything right then. But the words refused to come. After his shower, Chinedu got dressed for work. "Did you sleep well?" he asked while adjusting his watch. Adaeze hesitated. "Not really." "Why?" She quickly shook her head. "Just one of those nights." Chinedu walked over and kissed her forehead gently. "Don't stress too much. Everything will be fine." His words made the guilt inside her grow heavier. If only he knew what had really kept her awake all night. Later that day, Adaeze tried to focus on normal activities. She cleaned the house, prepared lunch, even watched a television program for a while. But her thoughts kept returning to the conversation. By afternoon, she picked up the second phone again. There was a new message from Chinedu. "Hope you have a good day." The message was simple, polite, but distant. It felt like a quiet closing of the conversation. Adaeze understood why. He had already drawn a clear boundary the night before. Still, she replied politely. "You too." The conversation ended there. No more messages followed. And strangely, Adaeze felt relieved. The test was over. That evening, when Chinedu returned home, Adaeze noticed something different in herself. For the first time in days, she wasn't watching him with suspicion. Instead, she was observing him with something closer to appreciation. He dropped his bag by the door and stretched his shoulders. "My queen, today was madness," he said. Adaeze smiled. "Customers again. You have no idea. One man argued with me for 20 minutes over a charger." Adaeze laughed softly. "That sounds exhausting." Chinedu collapsed onto the couch. "Very." Adaeze walked into the kitchen to prepare dinner, but she found herself glancing back at him several times. He sat comfortably, scrolling casually through his phone. Nothing secretive. Nothing suspicious. Just the same man she had always known. After dinner, they sat together watching television. At one point, Chinedu turned to her suddenly. "You've been very quiet these past few days." Adaze's heart skipped. "Have I?" He nodded. "Something on your mind?" Adaeze quickly shook her head. "Just tired." Chinedu studied her face for a moment but didn't push further. "All right," he said gently. Later that night, Adaeze sat alone in the living room while Chinedu brushed his teeth in the bathroom. The quiet house gave her too much time to think. The guilt inside her had not disappeared. If anything, it had grown stronger. Because now she knew the truth. Chinedu had remained loyal without hesitation. He had respected their marriage even when he believed he was speaking to a stranger. But she had deceived him. Adaeze rubbed her temples. Should she tell him? Or should she simply let the entire incident disappear? Part of her feared his reaction. He might feel hurt, betrayed, or even insulted that she had doubted him in the first place. But another part of her knew something important. Keeping the secret would create a new kind of distance between them. A silent wall made of guilt. And Adaeze didn't want that. She wanted the honesty they once promised each other. The bathroom door opened and Chinedu walked back into the living room. "You're still awake?" he asked. Adaeze looked up at him. "Yes." He sat beside her on the couch. "You look like someone carrying a heavy thought." Adaeze forced a small smile. "Maybe I am." Chinedu leaned back comfortably. Do you want to talk about it? Adaeze hesitated. Her fingers tightened together in her lap. This was the moment. The truth sat right at the edge of her lips. For several seconds, she said nothing. Then she slowly turned toward him. Chinedu. He looked at her with quiet attention. There's something I need to tell you. Her voice trembled slightly. And for the first time since she had started the test, Adaeze knew she could no longer carry the secret alone. The truth had to come out. Adaeze's heart pounded so loudly she was sure Chinedu could hear it. They sat side by side on the couch, the soft glow of the television flickering across the living room walls. Outside, distant traffic hummed through the Lagos night, but inside the house everything felt unusually quiet. Chinedu studied her face. There's something I need to tell you, Adaeze repeated softly. His eyebrows lifted slightly. Okay, he said calmly. You're starting to worry me. Adaeze swallowed. Her hands were tightly clasped together in her lap, and she could feel her palms growing warm. For several seconds, she said nothing. The words were harder to say than she had imagined. Chinedu leaned forward slightly, his voice gentle. Adaeze, what's wrong? She exhaled slowly. You remember I said I haven't been sleeping well? Yes. It's because something has been bothering me. Chinedu frowned with concern. Did something happen? Adaeze nodded slowly. Yes. He waited patiently. She could see the worry growing in his expression, which only made the guilt inside her heavier. I need you to promise you'll listen to everything before reacting, she said. Chinedu gave a small puzzled smile. That sounds serious. It is. He leaned back again. All right. I'm listening. Adaeze took a deep breath. For the past few weeks, I started feeling like something had changed. Chinedu's eyebrows furrowed slightly. Changed how? You started coming home later than usual. And you were always on your phone. Chinedu looked thoughtful. Well, the shop has been busier lately. I know, Adaeze said quickly. And I believed that. But my mind kept wondering. Chinedu didn't interrupt. He simply watched her carefully. One night, Adaeze continued slowly, your phone lit up while you were in the shower. Chinedu sat a little straighter. And I saw a message. What message? Adaeze looked down at her hands. It said, I miss you already. For the first time, Chinedu's expression changed. Surprise flickered across his face. I miss you already, he repeated. Yes. He leaned back slightly, clearly trying to remember. I don't recall that message. You might not have noticed it when you picked up the phone, Adaeze said softly. But I saw the notification. Chinedu rubbed his chin slowly. And that worried you? Adaeze nodded. It did. Silence filled the room for a moment. Chinedu's voice remained calm. You could have asked me about it. Adaeze nodded again, shame washing over her. I know. Instead, you've been worrying about it alone. Adaeze hesitated. Then she shook her head. No. Chinedu looked confused. What do you mean? Adaeze's throat tightened. This is the part that's difficult to say. Chinedu's eyes narrowed slightly with curiosity. What part? Adaeze forced herself to look at him. I didn't ask you about the message. Chinedu waited. Instead, I decided to test you. His expression shifted again. Test me. Adaeze nodded slowly. I bought a new SIM card. Chinedu blinked. And I sent you a message pretending to be someone else. The room fell silent. Chinedu stared at her. For several seconds, he said nothing. Adaeze could feel the tension growing. I introduced myself as Amora, she continued quietly. And I started a conversation with you. Chinedu leaned back against the couch slowly. Realization began spreading across his face. You mean, he said slowly, those messages I received the past few days? Adaeze nodded. That was me. Another long silence followed. Chinedu looked down at the floor, processing everything she had just said. Adaeze's chest felt tight. She had no idea what he was thinking. Finally, he spoke. You were the one asking if I was married. Yes. And the one saying I seemed interesting. Yes. Chinedu exhaled slowly. For a moment, Adaeze feared he might be angry. But instead, he shook his head slightly in disbelief. Adaeze? I'm sorry, she said quickly. Her voice trembled as the guilt poured out. I know it was wrong. I should have talked to you. But I let my fears take over. Chinedu remained quiet. I didn't want to accuse you unfairly, she continued. So I thought, if I tested you, I would know the truth. Chinedu rubbed his forehead. You really went through all that just to test me? Yes. And you watched every message I sent? Adaeze nodded again. Yes. Chinedu sighed deeply. For a moment he looked almost amused, though there was still seriousness in his eyes. I can't believe this. Adaeze's voice grew softer. When you said your wife meant everything to you, I almost cried. Chinedu looked at her again. You cried? Yes. She wiped the corner of her eye. Because I realized how wrong I had been to doubt you. Chinedu sat quietly, thinking. Adaeze waited anxiously. After a moment, he spoke again. You know what surprises me the most? What? That you didn't recognize my typing style immediately, he said with a small smile. Adaeze blinked in surprise. What? Chinedu chuckled softly. I thought Amora sounded a little familiar at times. Adaeze stared at him. You did? A little. Why didn't you say anything? Chinedu shrugged. I assumed it was just coincidence. Then his expression softened. But honestly, I wish you had just talked to me. Adaeze nodded slowly. I know. Chinedu turned fully toward her. You've never needed to test my loyalty. Adaeze looked down. I see that now. Chinedu reached for her hand. His grip was warm and steady. I married you because I chose you, he said gently. Not just for 1 year or 5 years. For life. Adaeze felt her eye sting again. I'm sorry, she whispered. Chinedu squeezed her hand lightly. I understand why you were worried, he said. But next time, we talk first. She nodded quickly. Yes. Chinedu leaned back on the couch. So tell me something. What? What happened to the mysterious Amora now? Adaeze laughed weakly. She has disappeared forever. Good, Chinedu said with a grin. Adaeze looked at him with quiet gratitude. For days, fear had filled her mind. But in the end, the truth had revealed something stronger than doubt. Her husband's loyalty had never changed. And now, sitting together in the quiet living room, Adaeze realized something even more important. Trust wasn't built by secret tests. It was built by honest conversations and the quiet, steady love that had been there all along.